This podcast is sponsored by my counseling practice, Elizabeth Polinsky Counseling, where I offer weekly marriage counseling, weekend-long marriage intensives, and therapist training in emotionally focused couple therapy. To learn more about my marriage counseling services, visit www.elizabethpolinskycounseling.com. Welcome back to the Communicate and Connect podcast. You're listening to episode 40, A Veteran's Journey Towards Self-Forgiveness with Bob Taylor. I'm really excited to have a guest on our podcast today. He's a former major in the Air Force, and his name's Bob Taylor, and he's here to tell us all about self-forgiveness and this book that he recently wrote. So, Bob, tell us just a little bit about you and this book.
Well, Liz, first, thank you for the invitation. It's great to be with you, and I'm looking forward to learning a little bit more about you and your audience as we talk. My background is I'm a Midwestern Michigan guy, went to Michigan State University, and my senior year, I decided to join the Air Force as a B-52 navigator and went through officers training school and navigator training and ended up being stationed at Griffiths Air Force Base in Rome, New York. Mm-hmm. And in the last year that I was there, we deployed over to Diego Garcia and was part of Operation Desert Storm and flew 11 combat missions from there. And about a year after that, after we returned from Desert Storm, I decided to leave the Air Force active duty. And my best friend in college was a mechanical engineer at a medical device company in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Mm-hmm. And so it gave me a chance to bring my family back to Michigan. And we planted roots there and raised my family there and actually started several medical device companies along that journey and got back into the Air Force in the reserves as a KC-135 navigator. Eventually finished up just shy of 18 years as an Air Force Academy liaison officer. And most recently, I'm the CEO of a company called Alliant Healthcare Products. And we sell medical devices. I think over the course of the time, we've sold about $750 million of healthcare products into the VA and Department of Defense hospitals. And most recently, I became an author and decided to share some of my personal stories and what turned out to be about a 6-year research project in helping veterans really learn about themselves and how to transition from their military service into civilian life. The book's called From Service to Success.
Yeah, wow. That's so cool to hear you talk about all the different experiences you've had. You've really kind of moved around with different things. And your book, From Service to Success, I know we're talking a lot about self-forgiveness today. Is that what the book's about?
Well, self-forgiveness is one of the things that veterans need to learn about how to heal from their experiences. And what I'm learning, writing the book, I thought was going to be the hard part. It's actually after writing it and going out and talking to people, and I've learned a lot from veterans and their family members about aspects of the book that are maybe more meaningful to them. And so there's different aspects on what veterans need to learn. I always say people need to go through a boot camp or officers training school to kind of get programmed to be ready to serve in the military. Well, when they're done, if it was boot camp, they need kind of a reboot camp. And what I call it is kind of repurposing their mindset for the relationships, for their dreams and aspirations, for healing, and how to achieve their their best life. The subtitle of the book is New Mission, New Purpose, and a great journey, a new journey to a great life. So it
Mhm.
the self-forgiveness is one really important aspect of that whole new journey.
Yes, so I'm following. So the book is really about that transition. Um,
It's about transition and um, meeting veterans where they're at. So I just had a conversation with a gal that runs the Michigan Veteran Home, and these are veterans that are kind of um, nearing the end of life.
mm,
And she said, "Well, maybe this isn't really for them, but what I'm finding is that no matter where they are in their life, they need to find this self forgiveness, this reconciliation. There's always a time to heal and to heal your relationships and to uh, even if it's at the very end of your life, there's a there's a purpose that you can find. So whether you're just getting out or whether you're way late in your life.
yeah, I like how you're connecting self-forgiveness with healing. Um, and so I know there's so much more in your book, but this is one of the things that gets covered is how self-forgiveness can be related to your own healing. Um, and I know on my so like I'm a mental health counselor. I'm a marriage counselor. I actually didn't tell you that before we started our our call, but I am working with people's mental health all day in the context of their marriages, but often I would say pretty consistently over the past 3 years. Um, well, I've been working as a marriage counselor in private practice for about 3.5 years. Before that, I worked for the VA hospital,
Okay.
and I was a trauma therapist for them at the VA hospital. Um, and But even over the last 3.5 years in private practice, I would say about 75% of the couples that I work with are either active duty military, like one or both of them is in the military, or they're a veteran. Um,
That's
and
interesting.
yeah, I love it. This is like my who I love to work with. And I come from a dual military family, so there's like all sorts of stuff there. But depression and anxiety are big parts of, and of course PTSD at times, um, are big parts of what is is going on in the individual, but also a couple. Sort of like the couple is trying
Right.
to navigate around an anxiety disorder or or a PTSD or depression, even chronic pain, these different aspects of mental health.
A
And
sense of being lost, living without, a higher purpose. So my background to kind of add in is shortly after I returned home after combat, I started having these nightmares and they lasted for about 6 months and then they went away.
mhm,
And about 16 years later, they came back and with a vengeance. I don't know really what triggered them, but you know, I got to the point where I was afraid to sleep because the nightmares were so terrible. And so I started, you know, a little toddy at night,
mhm,
uh, maybe one, two, or eight. And I very quickly got behind the eight ball and um, was not living the best version of myself as a person, as a husband, and as a father. And
mhm,
it was at that point where I decided that I needed help and got to the VA. And I told my therapist, I said, I will do everything that you ask me. I will do every exercise. I will do everything that you ask me. I will be your best patient. And I think I lived up to that promise.
Yeah.
And so, I still talk to this therapist. It's been 10 years now. It's never something that you just kind of get a cure and move on. I think I'm always learning about coping skills.
Hmm.
And so that's a lot of this book is sharing my own personal journey through that. And so it's not a comfortable thing sharing this in public,
Yes.
right?
And even on this podcast right now, I was thinking you're being so vulnerable to share all of this with me, but also everyone who's going to listen to this. And I think I just wanted to say thank you for
Well,
being
you
willing
know,
to do that.
if I had a broken arm, um, you would notice my sling and you'd probably give me some empathy, and that would be about it. There's a stigma that goes along with mental health. And I didn't choose to start having nightmares. As it turned out, I suffered from depression and still do on occasion. And I didn't choose that.
Hmm.
And no one does. And it doesn't, I'm a CEO of a company. I have great relationships. I've been able to succeed. For the most part, I kept all this from anybody for a long time.
Yeah.
And, but what I decided is when I wrote this book, I knew that I was going to have to talk about this and that I was going to have to kind of share my own journey. And what I'm finding is it's being reflected back to me, the appreciation. And I talked to a mother over in VA Battle Creek whose son is struggling,
Hmm.
and she was able to open up a little bit and share a little bit about her son. And I've had other veterans kind of share a little bit. And so maybe I can just start a dialogue. And that's the whole purpose behind writing this book and trying to get into the hands of veterans.
Yeah. I really appreciate your approach to that. When I'm thinking about it as you're sharing, it sort of removes some of that stigma. If you share about it, it gives other people permission to talk about their experiences, and it also tends to help people feel like they're not alone. I was just having this conversation with someone today, like painful things are painful, and the pain is really painful. but
Right.
um but it's worse if I feel like I'm in pain and I'm alone in the pain. And to be able to open up a dialogue around these things, I think removes that piece. Of course, there's still the pain of being in the pain, but I'm not in the pain alone.
Right.
Um,
What's interesting about this is that there's roughly 22 million veterans in the US, and about half of those veterans struggle to some degree. And so you think about all these veterans saying that um, they're alone. There's 11 million alone veterans, to kind of put it that way. So they're not alone. Um, there are things that they can do to kind of recognize everyone has their own trauma, everyone has their own story.
mhm,
It's not to say everyone's the same, everyone is different, but there are so many similarities of how they feel, how they kind of have written a story that puts even more pressure on themselves.
mhm,
And I think we have to recognize that we're not alone. You're not weak if you ask for help. You're not weak if you reach out to other people. It's actually a sign of strength. And the whole name of the game here is to achieve something great for yourself and your family. The the probably the single biggest regret I have of my life is that for whatever reason, it took me over 16 years to get help.
Hmm.
It's made that much difference in my life and in my marriage and in my relationship with my kids and with other people. And I wish I would have started that sooner.
Yeah, I can really, really understand that. I can really understand that. I'm just thinking right now, and my brain is like going in a few different directions. You know, I think I was thinking, it does. It has such a big impact on relationships. If I'm struggling in some way, um, it it doesn't just impact me, it does impact my family and my kids because we're all so in sync with each other. We're all in tune
Right.
with each other in such a deep way. Um, and then I start thinking about your comment on it's not weak to ask for help. And that's certainly the case with like going for therapy. But often when I work with couples, I'll see I can't let my spouse into what's going on with me because I don't want my spouse to think that I'm weak. Um,
Right.
and it even comes up in that way. But I know often the spouses are really craving to be let in, to be able to kind of share the burden in some way.
So one of the things that I'm hoping as people, um, I have these programs of buy a book and donate some, whether it's one, five, or 10 books. Um, People can go to patriotpromise.org and donate these books. And my hope is that a spouse and a veteran or a mother and a child veteran or vice versa, they can read the book together
Mm,
because there's what this mother in Battle Creek told me. She said, I'm going to read it before I give it to him so that I can kind of see things that I've seen in my son. And I think if people read this book together, that's what they're going to do in some of these group homes. And they're going to use it in group therapy is use it to say, oh yeah, that's something that I experienced. Because I shared stories from other veterans, not just my own. So people can maybe they can feel more comfortable sharing if they read it together.
yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love that. And so then I'm thinking about how does self-forgiveness tie into all of this since that's like our
Yeah. So
topic today. So can you
no,
help us
that's
bridge
yeah,
that gap?
yeah, absolutely. So first you have to. There's a starting point, right? So how do I get started? And one of the first things that I recommend is that people start practicing gratitude.
Mm,
And that's in a marriage or relationship. What I've noticed is if I start creating a mental list of all the things that my wife is doing that bothers me,
mm-hmm.
it's more about me than it is about her. It's more about my mental state than it is about what she's actually doing. And so I can recognize now if I'm making this mental list, I'm kind of holding her accountable for things that probably aren't on her. And so we need to shift towards this gratitude, just being grateful for the things, and all of a sudden you start to see in people the good instead of seeing the negative. So
Mm-hmm.
I always try and start um, with the mindset of gratitude, and that just opens your mind to something new. Then the next kind of layer of the onion to peel is this self forgiveness. And what happens is people that are hard on themselves will write a story about how they should have done something to prevent someone from being injured, or they did something and it caused this person to be injured.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of those are false narratives. Uh, but people can hold on to those for decades. They can say, if I wouldn't have gone to the store, I would have been home and I would have prevented that bad thing from happening. Or if I would have gone on that mission, my buddy would have stayed back and I would have been the one that was shot. And veterans tend to do this at a really high skill level. They tend to blame themselves for things that they're
Yeah.
really not accountable for. So that's why the self forgiveness is so important. Um, we have to let things go. Forgiveness isn't, when you forgive someone, it's not for the person that you're forgiving. It's really for yourself. It's to let go of something.
Mm-hmm.
And when you forgive yourself, you happen to be the benefactor of that two times over. You get the grace of being forgiven, but you also get the benefit of forgiving yourself. And so I didn't really, I've just had conversations about this lately. And I think one of the ways to practice self forgiveness is you start with like a little internal quiet confession where you admit that you have wronged someone or you've wronged yourself in thoughts, words, and deeds.
Mm.
And we say this at church by what we have done and sometimes by what we've left undone. And I haven't loved people around me like I should. And so if you can start with that and then you specifically think about the thing that you feel that you did wrong, you bring that up either to yourself or you can write it on a piece of paper. If you write it on a piece of paper, you can put it in a bowl and you can light it on fire. And that has a very positive feeling to see that kind of burn and just turn
Mm-hmm.
into ashes. But to confess to yourself what it is you're holding yourself accountable for, and then saying, I forgive myself. Just say those words, I forgive myself for the things that I believe that I did wrong. And it's not going to be just a one time thing.
Yeah, I was
Uh,
just thinking this is going to be like a practice, like how people develop a yoga practice or a meditation practice. It's going to have to be a practice where I practice going through these steps to try to forgive myself, is what
yeah.
it sounds like.
And that's what I've tried to do in the book is outline these steps of just kind of one at a time. I didn't want to just write a book that laid out all the problems.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I'm not a super athlete that learned how to run an Ironman and that's my success story. It's more a journey of self-forgiveness, overcoming some of these mental health issues and being committed to trying to live the best life that I can.
Yeah, that is a big journey. I realize you were like, oh, I didn't do an Ironman, but I think for a lot of the people that I have worked with in the past, an Ironman might be easy
Right.
compared to like the process that you're describing. And for the people that I've worked with who did have PTSD specifically, who had a lot of self-blame and guilt around not being able to save someone or be able to prevent something traumatic from happening. And I think a lot of them would say I'd rather have an Ironman, you know. So,
Absolutely. And when I said I will do everything and I'll be your best patient, it was work.
Yeah.
You know, going through this, it's hard work, but the benefits are so worth it. The one thing that I suffered from, and I'm sure a lot of your patients do, is the irritability and
Mm.
the anger management, right? And I describe it like everyone has someone that says the wrong thing at the wrong time. If you're part of a larger family, someone in that larger family can irritate you.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's normal.
Yeah,
Uh,
everybody has this.
yes, everyone knows what that's like. The What I experienced in my irritability is, what if everyone said the wrong thing at the wrong time? What if everyone irritated you? And it sounds like, well, that's my choice. And it really wasn't at the time. I don't know why it was like that. It just, that's what it felt like. It felt like everyone was saying the wrong things, and it felt harmful. It felt like I was a victim of what people were saying, and it made me want to be angry in return. Well, that's
Mm.
not a good way to go through life, you know. Blaming yourself for something that you could be forgiven for, seeing things in a negative way when you can be grateful instead, and being irritable and angry when you can be happy and fulfilled. And it
Mm-hmm.
really is, it it's that kind of a difference.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, like, I'm imagining that person who's in that place that you were in before you got with the therapist at the VA. Like, if that person was listening to you talk right now, they might be like, this is crazy,
Yeah,
or some sort of reaction of like, I can't really have that, maybe. Or what are you talking about? That it could be so night and day like that.
so when I first went in, I had a sleep study done, and my legs were moving 270 times per hour.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Okay.
And
So many times.
that was because I was having nightmares, because I was having just these movements, and that's common with people with PTSD. And your mental capacity changes drastically when you're not getting a good night's sleep. And so that's one of the other big parts of this healing process, is get some sleep. And I know that sounds like a simple phrase to say, but there are some really beneficial things that happen when you get some sleep, change your mindset, start practicing basic wellness things in a relatively short period of time. I would say in months, people can start to see a significant difference. And to the spouse's benefit, they'll see a changed person.
Yes, what you're saying is really important. I'm remembering like a psychologist that I worked with when I did work at the VA, and he was all about sleep. Like his stance was like we should forget everything else almost. Let's just focus on sleep. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but
It,
um
I've
because
heard
of
that.
the
I've heard that
impact.
it's the number one thing that they want to take care of through the VA. So I can believe that.
Yeah, it has a huge impact on your mood. In fact, I was talking to somebody else a couple months ago. People should probably not quote me on this because I'm gonna get it wrong. But she was she was telling me about a sleep book that she was reading, and what she told me, which is very removed because I haven't read the book, and now I'm remembering what she told me that she remembered from the book. So this may not be totally accurate, but I think she was saying that you have like twice the amount of anxiety the next day if you didn't get enough sleep. And even if you got enough sleep that second night, the next day after that, you'd still have heightened anxiety because you didn't get enough sleep the 2 days prior.
Yeah, there's some cumulative sleep deprivation things. I've never in my life been very good with sleep deprivation.
Well, I don't think
Um,
anybody really is.
yeah,
So,
yeah. They some people can be doctors and go 2 nights without sleep or something like that. I've never been able to cope with that very well.
yeah. Yeah. So I like that that's included in your book, because that does make a huge difference. If I could go back to the self-forgiveness piece, it sounds like this was a really meaningful part of your journey. Do you mind describing a little bit of like how you came to more self-forgiveness and how, so I'm thinking like how other people might be able to do that too.
So we all make mistakes. We say hurtful things. As a marriage counselor, I'm sure you've heard all the stories, but there are times in our lives when we're not the best version of ourselves. And we can do things and say things that are very hurtful to people. Or we can make a mistake in some of the actions that we take that have consequences to other people. So I'm not certain that for me that I started practicing self-forgiveness as much as that's been part of my faith journey.
Mm,
So every week when I go to church, the very first thing that we do is confession and forgiveness.
mm,
Um, so that's kind of where it's come from me. And I'm really sensitive to try not to press my religious beliefs onto other people, but there is a benefit to having faith and experiencing that forgiveness that that's the whole purpose of our faith.
yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of people, you, not everyone is faith-based. I'm pretty open and honest that I'm not, but also know that so many military couples are. I was just having a conversation with someone else who's going to be on the podcast, and and they asked me, they were like, "Well, do you know the percentage of that?" And then I had to go look it up, and I'm struggling again with remembering exactly how much it was, but I want to say it was like 60 or 70%
Yeah,
of
it
the
it
military population is faith-based.
okay. It used to be in the 80s,
Oh,
and
so it still could be
well,
because it's
no,
been a little bit.
no, it's dropping off in the general population. So I actually think that um, that's what the general population claims, that about 60 some percent are self-proclaimed Christians or religious.
Yeah.
So
So I think there will be people listening to this podcast who appreciate that take and how spirituality has been involved in your process of forgiveness, because it is one thing for like a benevolent being to forgive me, but for me to be able to forgive myself is a whole nother task. Um,
right, that's
and
that's exactly right. And all I can say is that it's worth the effort. It's worth all these things are just words, right? Until we practice them to the point where they become beliefs or actions. And that's the whole premise is the more we say certain things, we might be talking to someone else, but we're also talking to our subconscious.
mhm.
And that the where the subconscious comes into play is these veterans that have these terrible stories that they don't share outwardly. Those stories are living in their subconscious. And when you when people try and keep those feelings inside, they come out in nightmares. They come out in 270 leg movements per hour, and they come out in more harmful ways. Um, but if we can learn how to express those things, how to forgive ourselves, that's where a deeper healing comes. And what it's healing is our subconscious mind, which controls so much of our happiness and things that we can experience in life.
Yeah. So if I could just repeat that, it sounds like there are two important steps to that. One is not keeping it on the inside, but actually expressing and sharing it, which is in a lot of ways what you're doing by being on podcasts like this,
Yeah.
writing your book, having people use your book as a tool that can help generate conversations around these types of experiences. So getting it out. And then the second step was, if I can rephrase what you said, it was about repeating how I want to be thinking. And you had sort of talked about, we all have these stories or false narratives of blame um, or something like that that
Yeah.
um, can be tied into what I am having a hard time forgiving myself for. But if I can um, practice the self forgiveness over and over and over, then it can eventually turn into a belief
Correct.
versus for how long people may have practiced blaming themselves. The blame has become a belief through the practice of blaming themselves. But if they can practice self forgiveness, it might, it can eventually turn into a belief of
Right.
self forgiveness.
Correct. It flips the
Okay.
script.
Yeah. I like that phrase. Yeah. Um, well, I'm curious if you have any thoughts about how military spouses might be able to support their service members, especially like given your firsthand experience. I don't know if there are things that looking back, you're like, gosh, this would have been really helpful if my spouse could have done this. Um,
Yeah. Well, I I do think whether it's this book or other books, having that time where you can sit and share stories together,
hmm
read self improvement, relationship books, could be love languages, right? It
hmm
could be, anything where you're just personally sitting together and sharing those stories and reflecting together is going to help in those relationships. The other thing that together, I think the spouse and the military person, they need to be aware of certain things so that they can decide when should I go get help? What are some, and if you don't mind, I've got
Yes, yeah, please.
five things, and we've talked about a couple of them, but I think it would be good. So if you're a spouse or a veteran and the veteran is not sleeping, they're suffering from nightmares, and the spouse is going to know if they're moving too much at night. Uh, if that's going on and they're getting less sleep than they need to go get help. There is help. There are sleep studies. There are treatments. I was shocked that my nightmares could be reprogrammed to stop being nightmares and to be something positive. And
Yes.
I don't know how to explain it, but that happened. So I don't suffer from nightmares anymore. Um, if you are if you're drinking or self-medicating just to cope with the challenges of your life, then you probably need to go get help. If the reason for your drinking is to get through the day because of the challenges that you have, that's probably an indication. Another one is if you're homeless or if you fear that you're going to lose your home. And then, regardless of your housing status, if you feel isolated,
hmm
if you just feel this deep sense of isolation, like you're alone and you don't know how to get through it, or if you've lost your home or you have lost your home, go get help or get your spouse some help. Um, your struggles are causing significant relationship challenges, or you're having trouble interacting with your coworkers to the point where it's hard for you to keep working. So if you this is something where it's hard to be self-aware as
Mm-hmm.
much, right? So sometimes you do need a spouse that recognizes, hey, you're always having trouble with your coworkers, and we're having a lot of trouble in our marriage. Maybe it's time to go get help. And maybe you start out together, but that's an indication for getting help. And then finally, if someone is considering harming themselves or someone else, um, it's a it's an incredible number. I think many people know that on average 22 veterans die from suicide every day, and that's a horrible number. But according to the CDC, something like 640 veterans attempt suicide every day. 1,500 veterans plan their suicide each day. And over 5,500 veterans every day are thinking about suicide. And so if you're one of those people that is considering self harm or taking your anger and as your irritability turns into greater and greater anger, if you're thinking about harming someone, that's the time to go get help. So any one of those five on their own is a reason for the spouse or for the veteran to try and work into some kind of mental health support.
Yeah. I'm glad you shared those because I think some of the military spouses that I come across, they're not always sure, like, they don't necessarily want to be accusatory of their partner, and they don't want to cause a fight or cause conflict, or convey like something's wrong with you. They want to be supportive, but they're also never really sure at what point should I be encouraging you to go to therapy. And so I'm glad that you included those. And I did not know those other statistics. I knew the 22 per day, but those numbers are,
I thought it would be like, twice as many people would
yeah,
attempt suicide. I was shocked at the number of people on a daily basis who are attempting suicide.
yeah. I'm still like taking it in. I think somber is like, I'm not sure if somber is an emotion. I'd have to like go look it up, but that's like the feeling,
Yeah.
um, sort of
It's
shock.
there's definitely a sadness with it.
Yeah.
And the the it's really one of the reasons that I wrote this book is so that um, maybe we can reach somebody.
Hmm.
Maybe this woman in Battle Creek can share some stories or share some thoughts with her son, and that causes them to seek help. And it's just the early steps in a positive way to offset the early steps in a negative way.
Yeah. Yeah, and it only really takes one. Like I've seen um books spread like wildfire, like if I know of something and I share it with you, then you maybe will share it with the people that you know who who might need the help. Um so I like what you're doing with the book. I know we're almost out of time. Do you have any sort of final thoughts or last takeaways or things that you want to share with the audience?
I would just share that, through my own personal experiences, life is not a straight line. Life can be cruel at times, but life can be wonderful. And for someone that served in the military, it is not the pinnacle of your life. There are great things, there are great possibilities that can come after military service. You went through the boot camp, the specialized training, the advanced training. You experienced discipline, learned many things. Now you can take those same practices of discipline, intellectual curiosity, fast learning, all those things that made that person successful in their military lives can be applied to great success in their post-military lives. And if they will reach out, work with other people, try to find what it is that makes them happy, find a cause that is greater than themselves. If they can find a new passion in their life, great things can happen. And I guess that's my ultimate message in this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And thank you for being willing to share so much about your experiences and about the book and how other people maybe will be able to go through a similar process towards the healing and the self-forgiveness. So I'm thinking people are gonna want to read this book. Can you say a little bit about how people could find the book or purchase the book or things like that?
Sure. So the book will be available. It's currently available as an ebook on Amazon. By the time this airs, I think the book will be available in all major bookstores, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and throughout the country. And they can also find it on patriotpromise.org. And if they go to patriotpromise.org and order one, we automatically donate one to a veteran, or they can donate an additional 5 or 10 books if that's what they want to do. So patriotpromise.org or any of the other bookstores.
Okay, great. And I'll include a link to patriotpromise.org in the show notes. So if people want to go buy a book or donate books, they can just go to the show notes and click the link straight from there.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you very much, Liz.
Me too. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, please take a second to go rate, review, and subscribe so you get all of our future episodes. Make sure to check out the show notes to sign up for our free 10-week relationship email course. This email course is really designed for people who are maybe having trouble with communication or connection in their relationship and helping them develop some quick wins right away to start improving it. While I am a therapist, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not considered therapy. And it should also not be a replacement for therapy. If you think you need a professional of any kind, you should definitely go find one. Until next time.